Thank you. Welcome to Abolition Democracy 1313. My name is Barnard Harcourt, and I'd like to begin in homage by reading a key passage from Angela Davis's interviews collected under the title Abolition Democracy. Abolition democracy is a term used by Du Bois in his work Black Reconstruction, his germinal study of the period immediately following slavery. Du Bois argued that the abolition of slavery was accompanied only in the negative sense. In order to achieve the comprehensive abolition of slavery, after the institution was rendered illegal and Black people released from their chains, new institutions should have been created to incorporate Black people into the social order. Former slaves needed access to educational institutions and needed to claim voting and other political rights, a process that had begun but remained incomplete during the short period of radical reconstruction that ended in 1877. Du Bois thus argued that a host of democratic institutions are needed to fully achieve abolition, thus abolition democracy. Du Bois was writing about that brief period of Reconstruction following the Civil War, 1866 to 1877. And he was writing in 1935. Several decades later, Angela Davis emphasized the contemporary relevance of the idea of abolition democracy in our current times of racialized mass incarceration, of the brutal, violent, deadly policing of persons of color, of our punitive society today. Because after that short period of Reconstruction, the conservative white supremacist forces in this country began to rebuild, brick by brick, a social system of racial hierarchy and oppression comparable to American slavery. And the main device, the very mortar that would hold together that new system of racial oppression and hierarchy, was the criminal law and its enforcement. New criminal codes, resurrected from the antebellum era, placed onerous duties and harsher punishments on freed Black women and men. The infamous Black codes criminalized ordinary conduct under pretextual vagrancy and public disorder rationales, and meted out even harsher penalties with the dire consequences for the civil and political rights of those who had got trapped in the new web of racial injustice. The criminal law, law enforcement, law and order in some, became the main tool to return the country to a system of racial apartheid. First de jure during the Jim Crow era, and now de facto with racialized mass policing and incarceration. The criminal law was developed as a political strategy, as the key device to entrench racial hierarchy in this country, in effect to return the country to an antebellum caste society. The harsher punishments of African Americans ensured that they were stripped of their homes and taken out of the labor market, that they forfeited their property, could not work, and became once again free labor. The prison sentences stoked a new system of convict leasing that re-enslaved Black men and women. The criminal record served to disenfranchise swaths of African American from the voting polls and strip them of any civil and political rights. The sprawling Black prisons were turned into plantations, literally, such as in Louisiana with the Angola plantation prison known colloquially as the Farm. Lynching mobs in tandem with law enforcement brought forms of terror that sent wave upon wave of Black men, women, and children fleeing their homes, abandoning their property to find refuge in only slightly less threatening jurisdictions. In effect, the criminal law and its enforcement were the linchpin to dispossess freed Blacks, women, and men of their property and of any gains they had achieved with emancipation. And we can trace a direct lineage from those criminal legal practices to today's policing and punishing. From street stops and frisks and broken windows policing, to juvenile supervision and detention, to charging decisions and cash bail, to prison time and parole revocation and felon disenfranchisement. At every step of the way, the criminal law is enforced in a disproportionately harsher way against persons of color today. And this has created, as Isabel Wilkerson writes, a caste society in America. Our jails and prisons are filled with poor persons of color. Our courtrooms are color-coded. As the Sentencing Project reports to the United Nations, the United States, in effect, operates two distinct criminal justice systems, one for wealthy people and another for poor people and people of color. You walk into a misdemeanor arraignment courtroom in this country, in so many counties, only to find a procession of young Black men in jumpsuits, jangling in their chains, secured to each other at the wrists and ankles, a sight that resembles more the unloading of a slave ship after the Middle Passage than anything that could possibly be called justice or law. The experience is utterly horrifying for anyone who has even an iota of a sense of justice. Still today, with police killings of unarmed Black and Latinx women and men, with blatant racial profiling and grossly disproportionate policing and enforcement in African-American communities, 85% of the stops, 85% of the stop and frisks in New York City were persons of color, right? With a capital punishment system in this country that is multiple times more likely to sentence someone to death based on the skin of the skin color, we live in a time still today in which the practices and the institutions of the criminal law serve as the glue, the very mortar that keeps together our system of racial hierarchy. W.E.B. Du Bois, his words ring as true today as they did in 1935. As Du Bois wrote in his landmark study, Black Reconstruction, the whole criminal system came to be used as a method of keeping African Americans at work and intimidating them. There began to be a demand for jails and penitentiaries far beyond the natural demand due to the rise of crime. Angela Davis developed this brilliantly in the 1970s. The Collective, Critical Resistance, Rachel Herzing, the other founders and members, identified this early on as well. Ruth Wilson Gilmore, Mariam Kaba, Dorothy Roberts, Amna Akbar, Allegra McLeod, and other brilliant critical thinkers have been analyzing and documenting and exposing this history tirelessly. This evening, with the launch of this seminar, we follow in their footsteps. We read their work. We try to trace with them, to understand, to highlight the genealogy of our racial caste society, and to trace it back, to analyze how it ties back precisely to the unfinished struggle for the abolition of slavery. Our abolitionist efforts today, whether they target the police, prisons, capital punishment, or more broadly, our punitive society, have to be understood through the perspective of the dark legacy and long history of the still uncompleted abolition of slavery. Welcome to Abolition 1313. In our series this year, we will explore the history of the abolition of slavery, as well as the current struggles for the abolition of the police, of prisons, of capital punishment, and tie those struggles to other abolitionist efforts today to abolish property, to abolish capital, to abolish oil and fossil fuels, to abolish borders, to abolish marital dominion, the property rights in one's spouse, wife, and ultimately to imagine an abolitionist horizon. Today we will begin with a celebration of the triumph of the human spirit. We begin listening. We begin by seeing. We begin by hearing the voices of those who have been the most directly affected and suffered the most from these legacies of racial injustice. We begin by experiencing with them and bearing witness to the injustice that we are combating and the glory of their ability to overcome those injustices. So let's start. There's so much learning for us all to do. We begin this evening with musical compositions by The Freedom Trap, a band that was formed in 2018 as part of Carnegie Hall's Musical Connections program. And I'd asked the men from the band who are here with us today to turn on their videos so that they can join me in this introduction. Hi, Kenyatta. Hi, Robbie. Hi, Ivan. Welcome. Welcome to Abolition 1313. The Freedom Trap is comprised of men who are formerly incarcerated at Sing Sing, and the band was facilitated by Columbia professor Chris Washburn, and it was formed at Carnegie Hall. They've performed at Carnegie Hall, but they were formed in 2018 as part of Carnegie Hall's Musical Connections program. And so they played Carnegie Hall, they played the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Foundation, they've played at Columbia and other venues. And I'd like to introduce the extraordinary artists first. So Kenyatta Emmanuel, so glad to have you with us this evening. Thanks for joining us. Kenyatta, the hope was that we were gonna have the whole band together and playing together, but that wasn't possible. And so instead we've asked you, and you've agreed to provide us with 2 videos this week of recorded music. Kenyatta, you're gonna be going first. You composed and you are gonna be playing Dreams They Go for us. Songwriter Kenyatta Emmanuel is an artist and activist who has shared his music from Sing Sing all the way to Carnegie Hall. And do I understand that you gave a full live concert the same day you were released after serving 24 and a half years in prison?
Yeah, with the help of these other men that you see here, and Chris and many of the artists who were part of that program. So it was a joint effort. It was an incredible experience, frankly.
I can imagine. How long ago was that?
So we're coming up on a year's release. It was October the 21st of last year.
All right, great. I want to introduce Robbie and Ivan also before we have a minute to chat. Robbie Pollock is a composer with Isaiah Umali of Freedom Trap, which will be the second song we hear. Robbie Pollock is a multidisciplinary teaching artist. He's the prison writing program manager at Penn America, and he collaborates with educators, arts, and justice organizations to highlight the humanity behind the walls. Thanks for joining us, Robbie. Thank you. We're thrilled to have you on. Before I ask you guys to chat a little bit, let me also introduce Ivan Calaff, who is the percussionist with the Freedom Trap. He's a student at Columbia University School of Professional Studies and Justice and Education Initiative scholar. And he also serves as a research assistant in the Social Relations Lab at Columbia University. So he's been a teaching assistant for courses at Sing Sing, and he's doing an amazing job here, keeping us all in line at Columbia, right? So tell me a little bit, how did the band start, and what has it been like being together? Go ahead, any of you. You want to jump in?
This is a Kenyatta question, just to be clear.
Yeah,
we all know it, so I'm not going to pretend.
Okay, so the band began, this collection of musicians began as a musical community inside of Sing Sing, frankly, and just taking the opportunity to express ourselves through music, just have that sort of freedom and that sort of community. I really can't stress that enough, in spite of and in the midst of everything that was, you know what I mean? And whether Isaiah or Boogie and I'm sorry, Isaiah, Ivan and Robbie, and just being that support for each other and that communication. And then once, you know, Carnegie added to the mix, it really just became a matter of learning to articulate ourselves perhaps in a way that was able to be understood and then expressed by larger society, maybe in that sort of language, and increasing our skill. But the relationship and the creativity of what it was existed, frankly. And you say it's a Kenyatta question, but frankly, it's an Isaiah's question, because Isaiah was the one who welcomed me into that community.
Isaiah also welcomed me. There's a lot of welcoming that happens as part of that. It's like part of my mission, you read in the bio, is like to show the human side that happens, the vision that people have on the inside. And it's not just in music, it's in all sorts of pro-social activities, from self-policing to mentorship, all kinds of informal leadership roles that people play on the inside that are horribly absent from conventional narratives. Even the best Hollywood narrative has failed to capture the true nature of community on the inside in a maximum security, you know, full of the worst facility. And so I think music allowed us to show even the men in the seats who come to the concerts, we're playing together as a team. We're playing with outside civilians who look at us as regular people. And that Chris Washburn pioneered that way back in, I don't know, 2012. He stepped on stage with us and he was like, you guys are playing in. And that resonates a lot. So it was literally breaking down the walls while the walls were still standing. I don't know any other way to put it.
Right. That's an amazing metaphor, right? Breaking down the walls while the walls are still standing. Yeah. Ivan, we're going to get a chance to chat later on too, fortunately. And you wrote a beautiful post. So I encourage everyone who's listening and reading and following online to read Ivan's post. You've been with the band for how long now, Ivan?
So I believe I got involved in 2015, I want to say. I'm the rookie. I'm the new guy on the set, so I'm still struggling musically. These guys, incredible. Not only are they incredible people, human beings, they're incredible musicians. And I've learned so much from them, and I'm still learning. And it's just been a fantastic ride. Chris Washburn is phenomenal. This guy is just, we've created, and it's the family that we created, you know, not just the music, but it's the family and kinship that I value, and it's just been phenomenal. So I want to like
Beautiful. Let's cut right into the music now. And the first song that Kenyatta taped for us just 2 days ago. We should probably turn off our videos at the minute that the video comes on. Can we share a screen here? Okay. All right. Let's go.
You can get used to anything. After a while, it's all the same color. Easy on the eye. Some dreams they snap, some dreams die. Slowly losing elasticity, pull beyond what hope redeems. and you wake to a sun that never blessed anyone with warmth or light or light. You can get used to anything, souls worn as roads for ill-fit shoes, tight as pain and twice as wrong. Hopeless, broken laces fixed with knots so strong, the long forgotten past can never be removed. And you live in a sun that never nourished no one within these walls to grow, and dreams they go. You can get used to anything safe in a box just big enough for you, and a dream that can endure. Strong enough to keep you in, keep them out, keep it all together till the right time comes to step into a sun that God has made, give everyone the light they need to be. You can get used to anything, dreams such a fragile thing. I think I'll keep 'em. I think they'll keep me. You can get used to anything, dreams such a fragile thing. I think I'll keep 'em. Think they'll keep me.
That was so beautiful, Kenyatta. Come on back in. Right, there you are. Man, thank you. That was amazing. Amazing.
Thank you.
Amazing.
Thank you.
So moving. It's so powerful.
Thank you.
So it's hard to follow up on that, but we got another tune. And this one is Robbie Pollock And it was written with Isaiah Umali, who I didn't get to introduce because he wasn't present, but I got to. He's a New York native, guitarist, composer, visual artist, and he's one of the founding participants of Carnegie Hall's Musical Connections program at Sing Sing. So let's see. Let's turn on the second video, and we're going to hear from, this is going to be played by Robbie Pollock, and it's accompanied by Leo Traversa.
Danny can't hold it, sky's unfolding, feels enormous, white and blue. Ooh, you bet he's on it, plans look gorgeous, no drama and no warrants, no more time to do. Cut to the street, curfew in the heat, constant compromising just to make ends meet. Constant pressure not to let nobody down, not to violate, to never admit defeat. Plans change and the big one's fate. His heart strained till he thought it would break. Called out to him. Called out to heaven. In real life, hollered back, job applications and background checks. Why does freedom feel like a trap? Why does freedom feel like a trap? Everywhere he goes, Mrs. Brown, so he holds on to the memories that he many mornings, dingy and golden, feeling daunted, bummy job to do, living lonely, thinking about his homies, dreaming of a moment when those dreams come true. Cut to the scene, they're looking at me. Even in his suit, he still remembers wearing green. Even with his training, has a tough time explaining gaps on his resume. He needs a resume to sweep. Plans change and the big ones fade. His heart strained till he thought it would break. Calling out to called out to heaven. But real life hollered back, job applications and background checks. Why does freedom feel like a trap? Why? Everywhere he goes, he misses his bro, so he holds on to the memories that he hates. The real life holler back, job applications and background checks. Why does freedom feel like a trap? Why does freedom feel like a trap? Everywhere he goes, he misses his bro, so he holds on to the memories that he hates. calling out to hell. Calling out to hell. Real life holler back, job applications and background checks. Why does freedom feel like a trap? Why does freedom feel like a trap? Everywhere he goes, he misses bro, so he holds on to the memories that he hates. Real life holler back, background checks. Why does freedom feel like a trap? Why does freedom feel like a trap? Everywhere he goes, he misses his bro, so he holds on to the memories that he hates.
Woo! Amazing. Come on back on. Woo! We got an audience here. Everybody's applauding. In our socially distant, thank you so much. Why does freedom feel like a trap? When did you write that piece?
It was really a collaborative effort.
Right, with Isaiah.
Yeah, Isaiah's had the chords, and we were like, what do we want to talk about? Something light and fluffy, or the worst part about this song and its writing is that we ended up performing it back at Sing Sing, which was really hard, talking about the challenges of parole and reentry to people who haven't even gotten to experience it yet. But
yeah. All I was thinking of during the music was all those friends of ours who can't be with us here listening, you know. Yeah. Holding on to memories that you hate. It's deep. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us. We're going to do this live. I promise. We're going to work on this, and we're going to make it happen, and we're going to have all of you playing together, okay, on Columbia's campus very soon. All right?
Thank you for
having me,
Professor.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you so much for having us. It's been a pleasure. It's been an honor. Keep up the good work.
So I'd like to turn next to another extraordinary artist who had the great fortune of meeting about a year or so ago at a celebration of Bryan Stevenson's movie, Just Mercy, based on the book. And you may recall, for those of you who've read the book, all of my students for sure, anyone else there in the audience who has read the book, chapter 8 is about young people, children, who are sentenced to life imprisonment without parole in this country, who were sentenced. And it starts with a beautiful poem, called Uncried Tears by a poet named Ian Manuel. Ian, could you turn on your video and join us? Thank you. Thanks for joining us, Ian. So the chapter really is all about, well, Ian's case is featured mostly in the chapter. Ian was sentenced. It's hard to say these things. At the age of 13 to life imprisonment without parole. He spent 26 years in prison, 20 of them in solitary confinement. We should have a moment of silence for that. And Ian was released thanks to the extraordinary work of Bryan Stevenson and the lawyers at the Equal Justice Initiative. And that was following the US Supreme Court decision in Graham versus Florida, which ruled that life without parole sentences for juveniles for non-homicide offenses were unconstitutional. Ian is a poet, an author. He also has a book coming out. I think we got a cover of the forthcoming book. It's called My Time Will Come, a memoir of crime, punishment, hope, and redemption. And it's coming out in April 2021 with Penguin Random House. And so I urge you all to pre-order it and start getting it. So Ian, welcome. It's great to see you again. Thanks for coming on.
See you as well. No problem.
I know you've had a long day. You had a long shift today, huh?
Yes, I did. Long shift today, but I'm always willing to do the work that counts, the real work.
Right, and this is the real work.
This is the real work. Yes, it is.
So how long have you been out now?
I was released 2 days after President Trump was elected. So President Trump was elected November 8th of 2016. I was released November 10th, 2016. Mm-hmm. So going on 4 years.
Right. And you're now in New York?
Yes, I'm officially a New Yorker. I moved to New York after going through EJI's reentry program. Getting reacclimated to society. Getting used to grocery shopping, laundry, and crossing the street with cars coming at you, and just opening a bank account, and just all the trials and tribulations that you go through, trying to reacclimate yourself to society. Right.
Because that was a long time out of society there in a different space, huh?
Yeah, 26 years from age 13 to age 39. I was locked up longer than I had been alive in society. I went to prison when I was 13 years old, and I ended up doing 26 years, so double my age I was when I was first incarcerated. And sometimes it just seems so surreal that I'm actually here living my life now as a free man with no probation, any restrictions, free as a bird.
And it was through poetry that you got to know Brian, right? You want to tell us that story a little?
Well, it was, Brian wrote me a letter first. Brian wrote me a letter seeking to become my lawyer. And it was through when he began writing his book, Just Mercy. He wrote me a letter, and he was like, Ian, I believe my book, Just Mercy, might get read by a lot of people. And I'd love to include your poem, Uncried Tears, in my book, if you give me your permission. Now, here was a guy that had taken my case for free, who was fighting for my freedom pro bono, and yet he was asking me for permission to use a poem in a book that was gonna guaranteed be a bestseller. I couldn't believe it. But that's who he is as a person.
Right. And so you've continued to write poetry? Yes. And recite poetry. And we're hoping that you could recite one of your poems for us tonight, or one or two.
Yeah. I definitely have a couple poems in mind that I like to share with you guys. Okay. The first one, I think I'll start off by sharing the poem, My Time Will Come, since that's the title of my book.
Now let me turn off my video so that you got the full screen, okay?
No problem.
Right. Go for it.
I promise you, the brunt of my oppression has a purpose, and this same person that you persecute will one day be worshipped. Though I stand before you bare-chested and shirtless, with my soul and emotions naked, just wanting to be nurtured. Yeah, despite the desperation, desertion, and hurting, my time will come. Though I compose this poem, not knowing if I'll ever be able to perform it in an auditorium. I do it with the faith of a poet that believes he was born to do it, like an acorn caught up in a storm, flung from the branch where it was born. You can only hold me back for so long. My time will come. Despite the difficulties and disappointments, my determination remains undaunted. Though the waters of my tomorrows are deep and uncharted, the buoyance of my character will float unwavering towards them, like a song written, yet unrecorded. My time will come. Though you wrap me in chains and sprayed me with chemical flames and did all of the things you did to add to my pain, my circumstances will change. I believe this with the depths of my being, that as long as this world continues to spin, it cannot end until it's been enjoyed by Ian. Remember this day, because things won't always be this way. My time will come. My time will come against all conceivable odds. My time will come. And I wrote that poem in solitary confinement. When I,
Yes.
thank you.
That was,
Thank you, thank
you
you.
wrote that one when you were in solitary?
Yeah, I wrote that poem when I was in solitary, and I'm trying to decide which poem I have so many good poems that I want to share, and I'm going to share one that I usually I don't usually do, but I think it's relevant to the topic of what we're talking about here tonight. It's called Waking Up in America.
Okay.
It says, I had a dream Dr. King never got shot, that he was alive and still in love with Coretta Scott. I had a dream that the struggle had not been forgot, and that we remembered what we went through to achieve what we got. I had a dream Black history wasn't limited to a month, and our children learned the truth in the schools where they're taught. I had a dream I never had to pledge allegiance to a flag that tied Blacks to a tree and beat them till they died. I had a dream my mother never grew up in a country where she drank water from a fountain that said for colored folks only. I had a dream that the fire inside the people didn't make police use fire hoses to drown out their cry for freedom. I had a dream Rosa Parks never went to jail, and Dr. King never wrote letters from a Birmingham cell. I had a dream the color of my skin didn't make a difference, that I was judged on intelligence and the depths of my spirit. I had a dream that this country had positively progressed, that the Little Rock Nine would never see Agenda 6. I had a dream that racism never did exist, that there was never a reason for someone to be discriminated against. I had a dream we never had to fight for civil rights, that Blacks never felt whips strike their naked backs. I had a dream our screams never echoed through the night, that we didn't have to pay for freedom by laying down our life. I had a dream slave ships didn't transport us to Florida, that slaves weren't thrown overboard if they died during the voyage. I had a dream we all were judged on the content of our character. I didn't realize it was a dream until I woke up in America. Thank you.
Oof, wow, Ian, boy. Well, we can't make all of those dreams come true, but the ones about the future we're going to work on, and we're going to work on together. And that's
Yes,
the whole
sir.
purpose of Abolition 1313, to make those future dreams come true, right?
So yes, looking forward to working to try to bring them to fruition.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you so much, Ian. We really all owe you an amazing debt of gratitude for your fortitude, for your strength, and for what you bring us, what you bring to us every time we meet.
Thank you,
Every
sir.
time we hear you, we learn from you, Ian. We learn from you.
So
Thank
much
you so.
You're welcome.
So, and we'll definitely, we'll hear from, we're going to put the Freedom Trap together and we'll have a live concert and we'll bring Ian Manuel to Columbia as well. And we'll have some live poetry reading. It was a thrill to have him last year, or actually, I don't even remember when it was. I think it was in February when we did the screening of Just Mercy, right? That was a great afternoon. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We will make those dreams come true. All right, next, what I'd like to do is take you on a virtual art tour by artists, visual artists who are incarcerated. I'd like to welcome Kahari Turner. So if you can come on the scene, Kahari. Kahari is currently an MFA student at Columbia University, studying painting. Hi, how you doing? Good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Thanks. And along with the Digital Abolitionist, which is a student group you're going to hear from next when we get to the organizers and all of our militant activity here at Columbia, together with Digital Abolitionists, you, Kahari, curated this past summer a virtual art exhibit featuring work mostly by artists on death row, most of them incarcerated at San Quentin State Prison in California. Now you're going to be taking us for a tour through the digital gallery that the Digital Abolitionist created. So rather than me ask you questions right now, why don't you take it away and you can tell us a little bit about the story putting together as you take us through the gallery and show us some of the amazing artwork by these artists who are incarcerated mostly at San Quentin. Okay, I'm going to turn off my video. You're going to go and we're going to share the screen that's going to go through. I think Hannah Agbarin is going to share the screen and then she'll come on. Hannah will come on later. All right, go ahead. And thank you, Kahari.
Thank you. I'm glad everybody is here. Hoping everybody loves the exhibition. So again, here is the exhibition. Welcome to our Row Art Voices from Inside. There's a small video of me on the work. And if you're thinking about what's happening in the space and anything as far as a little bit more about the artwork that's in here, then feel free to watch that video. I'm just gonna give a little quick tour of kind of how it was curated, how I worked with the Digital Abolitionists to talk about exactly what's going on in this exhibition. So right now, what we're looking at is what I would call room 1, which was the Room of Abstraction, and we can go on to the first piece. And so the biggest thing about putting together a work of multiple pieces from different artists who have been incarcerated was to take on and make these different works that all of these different people have and fitting them into this exhibition that was digital. Now, obviously, we were trying to do a in-person exhibition, but this one was all about taking all of these, with the COVID, it was a lot of opportunity to take all these different places and different images from all these works from across the nation and putting them in one exhibition. So in this one right here, I wanted to make sure that this room had these kind of different aspects. So this is one of the first abstractions by Michael Morales. And I was thinking about how do I incorporate abstraction in a way that I'm talking about the rigid and very structured way that prison kind of takes in all of these different people. And then we move on to the next piece.
And so Michael Morales is in San Quentin right now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Kahari. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so in thinking about these next pieces, we're talking about all of these different aspects of thinking of the mentality of blurring the lines. So you see the piece at the top, it's marked here as number 3, but in the works, that's the way that you're looking at it. And then we'll go on to the next room. So this was the abstraction room. And then the next room is kind of all about the mental space and thinking about these areas that people are in. And so you see this one titled Prison Yard, and thinking about this large area and the guard tower and the wires and this kind of vast space. Like you wouldn't usually see a prison yard like this, but the idea is all about the mentality of being in the same space. So then you go to the next image. And this whole room, and just like this, is if you were in solitary as an artist, like thinking about this space. And so in this work titled My Reflection, I was really pulling these different works from this room to kind of show a little bit about why the room is set up the way it is. It's a little bit about history of, you know, the people who are incarcerated, but also about this mentality of trying to figure out a way to stay an artist while also being in this situation and dealing with these circumstances. So the next room, or the next piece, okay, next room. And so these works from Alfonso Howard are some amazing works. And this whole room is about figuration and abstraction mixing together. And so you have this work here that takes these long, slender figures and puts them in this kind of romantic pose, but also in like this family-oriented situation that has, you know, a lot of different aspects of it coming together. And so you think about intimacy while in the space, and also you think about the idea of what does a human feel and look like in these spaces. And so you go to the next image. And so in this one, again, in the same room, it's all about this abstraction mixing with this figuration. And so reaching into Latin, Cubano, you know, Mexican, all of these different cultures mixing together in this space. And so in this one, I was really interested in the way that, you know, these Aztec features, but then also this like long history is incorporated into this kind of microcosm of a reality that Luis was really trying to put together here. And so in this room, that's really what everything is about. And so these are the things that I'm pulling from. Like all of these works are coming from all these different people and all of these different experiences. I was really reaching to see how I can have a conversation with each individual in these same different rooms. So 5 rooms was really great because it allowed us to take the abstract and then the narrative and then the fantastical and really try to, you know, have the conversation around everything that's in these spaces. So then we go on to the next room, which is about freedom and nature and thinking about also, you know, the expenses of what's going on around us. So then you have Bill Clark's Death Row piece here and thinking about, when I said nature, you know, thinking about tuna, thinking about being entrapped, being caught up in the kind of narration of life in these situations, especially Black and brown skin and all of these people of color, but also, you know, obviously there's other people in jail, but the way that you see this image, you notice the skin tones right away. They pop out along that purple hue that you get in that fuchsia. And thinking about right in the beginning, you see Death Row big, packed in hypocrisy, 100% racist, dehumanizing. Right away, you already know exactly what's coming from this. But this room also has a lot of references to nature. So you get this image of imagining these men and these people as tuna. But then you go to the next image. And then you get this idea of like, what is Earth outside of this space? You're looking at this room and you're seeing all these whales and these birds, and you see these representations of tuna, and then you see the Earth in kind of this encompassed area, like you see the curvature of the Earth, but you see this land, and only this one central piece of land, and thinking about how all of these different variations of that space like culminate into this one image. And so that's what the basis of this room is. And that's kind of how I wanted everybody to take it. So you kind of start off in the space and then the exhibition, and you move to the left, and then you'll make yourself all the way around. So you'll see the abstract, and you'll go into these ideas and mental, and you'll go to the figured, and then you go into this nature, and then finally you end the room in what I kind of think of as an overall agony, or an understanding of the pain that goes into these men. Like, I didn't want the whole exhibition to be about the tragedy of being an inmate in this situation. I wanted it to be hopefully, you know, a view inside the thought processes of the people who still create art while also, you know, being a part of this and having to be, you know, a person who has to deal with being in a situation where you can't escape. So this last exhibition was really to drive home kind of that emotional aspect that most people would feel if they were to be incarcerated. So this image right here, Kenneth Reams, who we were doing an amazing show with earlier, and this is a sculpture that he did of, you know, the chair and all of the straps and everything that goes into kind of being restrained. And then we follow up with that final image. So go to the next image. And then to follow it with Daniel Landry and that pain. And thinking about this as an experience of, you go through all of these things kind of in the same way that people go through grief of, you know, not understanding it and really trying to figure out how you're going to deal with it to then get to this point, which is the last, right before going back to the abstract, where you see that pain like visually in front of you, and seeing, you know, the greens and these reds and the way that the hands and mouth are open, and how there's this imitation of blood coming from the mouth and from the wrist. So you have conversations around maybe possible suicide and trigger warning for anybody who's, you know, sensitive to those things. But, you know, all of these aspects of pain in this situation, and especially being incarcerated, having to deal with, you know, the loss of family, the loss of friends, and creating a new community for yourself there. So that was really the exhibition. It was really about trying to give multiple voices to people who have multiple different stories behind them, and trying to really figure out a way to have a conversation while also in the space giving a conversation with each individual work. And so this is what you get, and I'm really excited about, you know, future possibilities, but I'm also really glad and really thankful for having this opportunity to work with the Digital Abolitionist to, you know, put on this show. It was really, really, you know, heartwarming to me to be able to show all of these works. Like before, it was only an opportunity to maybe show, you know, 7, 10 pieces. Now we have 15 to 20 pieces in each room. And so it was really a great opportunity to make a space for people to really express.
Amazing artwork, amazing curating, Kahari. Have you been able to talk to the artists and tell them how it functions and how people can actually view it and the digital nature of it and stuff?
No, I haven't been able to get out in contact at all. And when we first started this, it was a lot of, you know, give and take on what we can do, and there was a lot of different moving pieces. And I've heard that there's been a really great interaction with the show, and there have been people who've been interested in buying the work from the artists, which is great, because getting money into the pockets of people who are inside is super important. Especially
well, we'll work on getting communication going with these amazing artists and getting them some feedback and telling how much we appreciate the artwork and how well it shows and how meaningful it is to us. I know Kenny Reams' piece that you showed us, I mean, I could barely look at it. I mean, so powerful.
Yeah, and that's why I think that it worked really well towards the end, because you kind of get acclimated to, you know, how you're seeing the space, and then you are left with that last little emotion of, you know, this is a reality. So. Right.
And you're an artist too, Kahari?
Oh, yeah,
is that your artwork behind you?
Oh yeah, I'm always in the studio.
All right, good. Well, we'll come do a studio visit soon. All right. Thank you so much for that and for that artwork.
Thanks for having me.
amazing, and amazing way in which one can actually, despite the pandemic and everything, actually visit it online like that. That's really amazing work by an incredible team, the Digital Abolitionists, who we're going to hear about next. So the musical compositions, the poems, Ian's poems, the artwork is really the triumph of the human spirit, and what it communicates to us, and how moving it is, and the bonds that it creates for us, I find simply remarkable. And as I look at all that work, I yearn for the work, the other work, the work that we need to do as well, all of us. And so I want to follow up that first part with artists, formerly incarcerated artists, and artists who are still in prison now. I wanted to follow it up with the inspiring group of activists and practitioners here from around Columbia on campus who are leading the abolitionist struggle today. I wanted to connect with them, and I wanted everyone here to connect with them. I want everybody to get to know all the work that's being done here, ongoing abolitionist campaigns, and all the work, all the important work that's being done. So what I'm going to do now is I'd like to invite one at a time, 5 different groups who are on campus and doing remarkable work. I mean, they're doing what I consider to be God's work. After that, we're going to have a panel discussion, a discussion with Alexis Hoag, Ivan Calaff, and Bruce Western, thinking about abolition today. But first, I want to hear about all the good work that's being done here, and I want everybody to know about the work, and so that everybody can connect and make this happen. So, Hannah, do you want to turn your video on? So, most of these all these organizations are non-hierarchical, and have a number of extraordinary students as part of it. Kenyatta Emmanuel is here with us right now in the classroom. Fonda Shen is behind the magical curtain. We're in charge of everything as we're actually doing this seminar. Hannah Agbarnan, you are in Paris, if I'm correct, yes, right now. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, I'm in Paris.
And basically, a number of students, and I haven't named them all, but you can do that. Established the Digital Abolitionist as at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, really. And their goal was to help inform the public about prison abolition, amplify the voices from inside, and support and build the relationships with other abolitionist groups. Hannah, why don't you tell us a little bit about your organization and what you all are doing, okay?
Of course. So just to start, hi everyone, I'm Hannah, and I'm one of the co-founders of the Digital Abolitionist, and I would like to thank Professor Harcourt for inviting us and you all for being here. So the group started last year, I would say. So we were a couple of undergrads taking Professor Harcourt and Professor Hoag's abolition practicum, which is when I was personally first introduced to the concept of abolition. And later on, some of us were planning on organizing an abolition summit at Columbia. And of course, the pandemic began and we ended up being spread across the world. And this is when we began to think about what abolition could bring in the midst of a global pandemic, and especially how we could help while being stuck at home and only being able to use internet, Instagram, etc. To campaign. And so we really tried to imagine and think outside of the box to try and determine exactly how digital advocacy and digital abolition could happen. I think that one of the particularities of the group is that we would all consider ourselves to be baby abolitionists, if not infant abolitionists. And we really tried not to reinvent the wheel, and we have tried to figure out exactly how we could contribute to this abolition conversation and this work. And this is how we decided to create an educational resource for people who were coming to abolition, newbies to abolition, and who wanted to figure out exactly what was going on, especially with everything that has been happening this year with the murder of George Floyd, Rihanna Taylor, Anthony McDade. We saw that more and more people were wondering about what abolition is, There were calls to defund the police and prison, etc., and people were asking what they could do. And this is how the platform arose. And we wanted to be as accessible as possible to everyone, organizer or not, seasoned abolitionist or skeptical reformer. And this is how the Digital Abolitionist was essentially born. We really want to highlight the grassroots abolitionist work that is happening in the US and specifically amplify the voices of people directly impacted, with a particular focus on those who are currently incarcerated. We want people who are new to abolition to be able to turn to the Digital Abolitionist for educational resources, action items, and opportunities to build coalitions. So we have worked on several projects over the past semester because we've been stuck at home and we had essentially nothing to do aside from that. So one of our biggest projects was to develop the Abolitionist Library. So it is a page with a lot of resources on abolition. So we try to classify it by themes so that people could choose a specific theme and then pick one of the books or articles, etc.
And that's all online, right? That is all online, right? So it's a digital library. It's a digital library that's online. Yeah.
Exactly. I can actually show it to everyone right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can share your screen, then we can kind of see where it is. I think it's all on the Digital Abolition website.
Exactly.
There we go. There we go. Okay, we're on the site. All right. There's the library.
And here's the Abolitionist Library. So as you can see, you have different themes. You have introductory readings, which are shorter, and then the must reads, etc. And I do have to say that we have an incredible team working on all this and updating constantly the library to make sure that it's up to date and that it's also related to current issues. So we have podcasts also. We are going to add videos eventually. So that's the Abolitionist Library.
That's amazing. That is an incredible resource. Yeah.
Thank you. And currently we are working on a new type of event that we have called Action Hours. So it's combining education and advocacy and coalition building. So the event usually consists of a panel of organizers and advocates who we talk with about a wide range of abolition-related issues. And then we have a moment of mobilization during which we ask our attendees to either donate, if they can, of course, volunteer, share, sign, call, etc., and everything that they can do from their own home. So we have organized our very first action hour last month with Micah Herskins of Aids to Abolition and Bridget Simpson, a wonderful grassroots organizer that you should check out on Twitter. She's amazing. And this action hour was called Abolition 101, and it was supposed to be a primer on abolition. So for everyone who's skeptical about abolition, who's seen it on Twitter, I was wondering how exactly does it work? How can we do it? A world without police? That seems crazy. And we really try to have these guests just simplify what abolition is and explain how it is and explain why it is doable and why we actually need it. And we're planning on doing more action hours with other guests. So we are currently super excited about our partnership with WINC. So WINC is a group of former University of Michigan students who are focused on the expansion of healthcare and feminine health products to women within state and federal prisons. We are also going to work with COVID Bailout New York and the Nevada Coalition Against the Death Penalty, because originally we were doing death row advocacy and death row and death penalty abolition advocacy, and then we incorporated the rest of abolition because it is everything, and a lot of stuff needs to be abolished. So we're trying to cover all this. And finally, we are also super grateful for our partnership with people who are currently and formerly incarcerated. A partner of the Digital Abolitionist who I would really like to highlight is Lyle May. So Lyle has been incarcerated on North Carolina's death row for 2 decades, and he's an advocate, scholar, organizer, and a phenomenal teacher. So we will send you a link with his writings. They are super informative, and I definitely recommend that you read them. They are amazing. And we were initially introduced to him through his work on prison education, and that now we meet with him on a bi-weekly basis via phone calls into Central Prison. to organize initiatives centered on decarceration. He's been invaluable to our coalition, and he's a constant reminder of how much we have lost to our punitive society. So this is essentially what we've been doing. So we will make sure to send you all the links to our website, social media. Definitely follow us on Instagram and Twitter, please. That would be great.
We'll share all that. We'll put it on today's website also. If you send us anything, we'll put it as resources for Abolition 113, so everybody can get those. We'll also send everybody to your website because of the library. That's amazing. Also because of the art exhibit and all of the extraordinary work that you guys are doing. So
thank you.
It's amazing what you've achieved already in such a short amount of time. I mean, basically this was your brainchild, all of yours collectively back in the fall of last year, I think,
yes,
as part of the practicum. And so it's amazing to see what has come of it. So congratulations. And there are other organizations here that obviously you know of, but the purpose and part of this is to get everybody informed about each other's work so that you can all work together. And the whole being greater than the sum of the parts. Thank you so much, Hannah, and thanks for all that amazing work to you and the whole team at the Digital Abolitionist, and thanks for that exhibit that Kahari showed us. Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Take care. I would like to next introduce Jindu Obiofuma, who is a movement researcher. And hi, Jindu, how are you doing? Put on your speaker.
Hey.
And hey, back to Columbia. We're so thrilled to have you back. Jindu was a law student here at Columbia Law School. What is it now? About 5 years ago, I think you started. five, something like that. Yes. I remember your first class. I remember your first day. And Jindu did amazing work here as a law student, and among other things, started the Prison Health Initiative, which has been doing incredible work in prisons, getting health care to prisoners. And then following her graduation from law school, Jindu began her career as a fellow at Harvard at the Criminal Justice Policy Program, where she was for 2 years as a fellow there up in Cambridge. And now, fortunately, we brought her back to Columbia, and she's going to be working as a staff associate, working at the Columbia Justice Lab, which is an extraordinary space here that we're going to hear about a little bit from Jindu, but also we'll hear later from Bruce Western, Professor Bruce Western in sociology, who runs that lab with Vincent Schiraldi. So welcome back to Columbia. We're thrilled to have you here. Tell us a little bit about kind of like how you approach your work from an abolitionist perspective, right? And what you hope to accomplish in part. Yeah, go ahead.
So the answer to that question would have been really different yesterday, but in light of everything happening with the Rihanna Taylor non-indictment, I wanted to kind of speak her name in this space and bring kind of like the ways I've been thinking about that case and the kind of disappointment and the wrath and the just despair people are feeling right now at a purported failure of the criminal legal system. So I hope you don't mind if I read some remarks.
Please do.
So I wanted to lift up Rihanna Taylor, a 26-year-old Black woman who would have been 27 by now, had she not been murdered in her sleep 5 months ago by officers Jonathan Mattingly, Brett Hankison, and Miles Cosgrove of the Louisville Police Department. Yesterday, a grand jury returned an indictment for one of the officers for wanton endangerment of Rihanna's neighbors. Not the loss of her life, but the risk to her neighbors. I'm in several spaces where people are discussing this in terms of a failure of the criminal legal system, or the opposite as an intended function of the system. And while those analyses are urgent and valid, abolition offers us, some alternate lenses to assess the criminal legal system that could deliver the kind of results we saw yesterday in Louisville. And the first of those lenses is legitimacy. Abolition gives us the means to strip our systems bare, assess them for their foundations and function, and then measure their outcomes against such just and moral imperatives like Black women should not be murdered in their sleep. The system that delivered the indictment yesterday, and I'm sure this won't come as a surprise to anyone on this call, is an irredeemable, illegitimate system. The criminal legal system, rather than delivering any of the safety or accountability it promises really facilitates violence. And that violence is predictably directed at Black, brown, poor, LGBTQIA, neurodivergent, femmes, and non-men. So when we see that system assume the posture of regulating itself or holding itself accountable, even on its best day, it will do so in a way that ensures its function of targeting, criminalizing, murdering, and otherwise disabling Black, brown, and poor, and otherwise marginalized communities will remain intact. A second lens through which I've been processing yesterday's events, and supported in part by the brilliant text, Force and Freedom, Black Abolitionists and the Politics of Violence by Kelly Carter Jackson, and I'll drop a link in the chat, has been how we interpret violence. For whom is violence reserved so as to render unremarkable or even acceptable, and against whom is violence valorized or even relished? And we'll find that those groups sharply overlap. And I've been thinking of the violence Black people, trans people, poor people, Latinx people, undocumented people, system-involved people, et cetera, are thought to deserve, so much so that when we experience this harm, when we experience this violence, we can't even fight back without the broader polis rising up in sharp rebuke. Rihanna was murdered in her sleep, but I think of another woman, Corinne Gaines, a 23-year-old who was murdered in her home while holding on to her child, who's 5, who was also shot. The police shot her to death and shot her child in the leg. She was holding a legally owned shotgun. And the police approached her home because she had allegedly failed to appear for a court date that she was never alerted to. And in one of her last recordings before her murder, you can hear her speaking to her child. She says, "Who's at the door?" And her toddler replies, "The police." She asks, "What are they here to do?" And that young child replies, "To kill us." And I think about Rayshard Brooks, who was murdered after the police were called because someone saw him sleeping in his car. I think about Tamir Rice, who was shot while playing with a toy gun, and whose sister was tackled and arrested after rushing to his aid, and how his mother was threatened with arrest when she rushed to the scene after 2 young boys told her her son had just been shot in the stomach. I think about all the ways violence is deployed as a response to crime that doesn't rise to the level of harm, sleeping, playing, failing to appear. And I think about the cities going up after these murders, and I mean the folks fighting for justice, fighting for accountability, really, really fighting. And I think about them being brutalized, imprisoned, murdered in ways deemed legitimate or deserved. I think about the 2 young lawyers potentially facing life in prison for burning an empty cop car. And this was in the wake of George Floyd's murder. And I remember speaking with other lawyers who wanted them to have even more of an extreme sentence, although arguably there are very few things more extreme than life in prison. And I think about how we are allowed to respond to a never-ending onslaught of violence that ranges from the obscene to the everyday, and how we are uncomfortable even saying the word violence in these conversations, so much so that we use proxies like harm, disparities, brutality, and so forth, that let us off the hook in interesting ways, undergirding that question of what law and order means in a white supremacist society. Abolition gives us an expansive and honest lens to foreground all of that violence that we're trained to ignore or downplay or even expect. And once you see it, abolition offers analyses, community, models and tools like mutual aid, direct action, de-arrest, and the moral imperative to step up and to challenge the status quo and to discard as illegitimate, all the ways that we're punished for doing so. So I just wanted to, speak that in honor of Rihanna, in honor of, how we're processing the events of yesterday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was so helpful to think through with you that way. I mean, the way you started, I think was, I totally agree with it. When you look at the long history of the way in which the criminal law and its enforcement was used as the principal tool to create racial hierarchy and to establish to reestablish basically a system that of equivalent to slavery, right? To imagine that criminal justice system could be used to resolve the problem it's just hard to understand. I mean, it functioned perfectly yesterday afternoon. It functioned perfectly. It achieved its goals. It granted impunity.
Right.
Right. And I agree entirely with you that the notion of abolition and abolition democracy couldn't be more poignant and on just completely right as a result of what happened, what we just saw yesterday, right? And I suppose that's what's guiding your work now, while you're going to be here.
Yeah, well, the idea of these systems of punishment and trauma as illegitimate, that's always motivated my work and my research. And so I'm excited to collaborate with my colleagues at the Justice Lab to end youth incarceration and support communities in doing so, and support communities as they transition to truly community-based alternatives and not kind of extensions of the carceral system.
Right. Which is, I take it, a work in abolition democracy. It's a work in creating the institutions that will displace those that have been functioning as they were born and intended to achieve inequality and injustice and reimagining a new future. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, we are thrilled to have you back at Columbia and to be part of the community and working with us and all the other groups on these important tasks and missions to keep to make Robbie's no, it was Ian and Robbie, but also to make those dreams actually come true for the future.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Can't wait to work with you now that you're here again. All right, great. So the next person I'd like to introduce is Cheryl Wilkins. Cheryl, if you can turn on there you go. Hi, Cheryl, how you doing? Good to see you. Have you got your mic on? Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear. Good. So Cheryl Wilkins is the Senior Director of Education and Programs at Columbia University's Center for Justice, and where she works to reduce the nation's reliance on incarceration, develop new approaches to safety and justice, and participate in the national and global conversation around changing the system. She's also an adjunct lecturer at Columbia University School of Social Work and been instrumental in developing the Justice in Education program here, the Justice in Education prison program here at Columbia University, which facilitates Columbia professors teaching inside Bedford Hills, Taconic, Sing Sing, and also teaching out in Rikers. So Cheryl, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm thrilled that you're here with us. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the extraordinary work that you do on justice and education and all of the amazing accomplishments that you've been able to have here through that program.
All right. First, before I start, I want to thank Jindu just for lifting up Rihanna Taylor. I mean, we all are feeling it at this moment. And I too just want to read a quick paragraph from Malcolm.
Please do.
The most disrespected person in America is the Black woman. The most unprotected person in America is the Black woman. The most neglected person in America is the Black woman. And I just feel so horrible that Rihanna Taylor paid the ultimate price just for being a Black woman. You know, and I'm having chills right now and was listening to John Doe, and we're talking about somebody who was trying to save lives and just because she was a Black woman, you know, had her life taken from her. And so, yeah, again, thank you, John Doe, for lifting her up, because we as a community are all feeling that maybe we didn't rally enough, maybe we didn't protest enough, because the ultimate outcome was what we thought it would be anyway, but we still had hope that somebody would be held responsible for that lady's death. And so we're not going to stop. Mm-hmm. So within my work
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you for starting there. Thank you.
Yeah. Within my work with the Center for Justice, we started 11 years ago, a colleague and I and myself, was an initiative at that point, and we were trying to build because we knew criminal justice issues not only crosses communities, it crosses discipline. So we wanted to engage Columbia with community and see as collaborators to ending this thing called mass incarceration and the criminalization of Black and Brown communities. And so we started with having public forums. We created Criminal Justice Caucus. We went into different classrooms and did modules talking about criminal justice issues. And we also brought formerly incarcerated folks into the side of the university. And one thing we wanted to do was lessen that fear factor on how you view a formerly incarcerated person. I definitely want to thank you for lifting up formerly incarcerated persons right here tonight and seeing them as experts, as folks that can work on this with academia to end this thing called mass incarceration. And so thank you for that. And so with our Justice and Education Project, we know that we wanted to provide opportunities for folks to engage in academia, whether it was inside the prison, whether it's when they come home, or even before, because we also know that mass incarceration does not start at point of arrest. It starts within communities that are not being invested in, and that's poor school systems, that's lack of proper health care, that's all of these systems that are not in favor of supporting those in need. We working in a system that are profiting off of those that need the government to step up and support us. And so, yeah, we're doing all these things inside the prison system, but not only, even in Rikers Island, where folks are not even convicted of a crime. And so whether it's through a higher education program in Rikers or creative writing, or we're doing some sort of art for justice. And so we're in 7 different facilities between prisons and jails. And we're doing that work. And lo and behold, it's just what we said it was going to be. Folks, when they have the opportunity to engage in these conversations, something wonderful comes out. And now we have 15 people on our staff, 11 of them are formerly incarcerated men and women, and 3 of them had fathers who were in prison. And so again, we want to uplift those who are directly impacted to have these engagements within academia, just understanding that academia can't do it alone and community members can't do it alone, but together we can be a force. And so that's the idea of the Center for Justice, to be a force to end this thing called mass incarceration. Because we have to band together to do this.
And you guys at the Center for Justice have been doing such extraordinary work. You've been really at the core, at the heart, and at the energy center of all of the work that's being done at Columbia. And I really think that the Justice and Education program is just one of the most important ways in which we, particularly as a university, can participate in these efforts and try and transform everything from the narrative, the way we talk about society, and to get beyond this punitiveness that we have in the racial hierarchy and injustices. So you were going to say something.
Just given the opportunity, we have folks on our team now that are researchers. We have folks on our team now that are educating high school students. But if you never had that opportunity, then you wouldn't know the potential. And so what we want to do is create those opportunities so we can go back in communities in need and give back to that population.
Thank you.
We are the experts on what's happening in our community.
Exactly. Thank you so much for everything you guys do at the Center for Justice. Thank you so much for coming on, Cheryl, and for sharing that with us. And again, everybody's going to be working together here in this huge campus effort. So thank you so much. Before I move on to the Barnard Prison Abolition Collective, we have two more groups I'd like to introduce to you: the Barnard Prison Abolition Collective and the Abolition Collective. Fonda Shen, who now runs my center, the Columbia Center for Contemporary Critical Thought, just notified me that the federal government just executed somebody whose name is Christopher Avialva. So moments ago, Christopher Avialva was executed by the federal government. And I think we should have a moment of silence. Thank you. Sorry, this it's me hard. I spent 30 years in representing folks on death row, so. All right, so I wanted to share with you two other groups, two other incredible activist groups on campus. The first one is the Barnard Prison Abolition Collective, and so I would ask Iga Schlendak to turn on your video and join us. Thanks, and then turn on your mic as well. So the Barnard Prison Abolition Collective is another abolitionist group at Columbia. Again, non-hierarchical, but Iga is going to tell us about that group. And they work on community education, campus activism, direct service, and so Iga, who's a senior at Barnard, why don't you tell us a little bit about your group?
Absolutely, and thank you so much, Professor Harcourt, for having us tonight. We're excited to be here. So hi, everyone. My name is Iga. I'm part of the Barnard Prison Abolition Collective, so BPAC for short. BPAC was formed 2 years ago as the Barnard Criminal Justice Initiative with the goal of mobilizing students against mass incarceration. We saw that there was not a student-based interest or service organization on our campus that was dedicated solely to criminal justice issues, and so we sought to fill that gap. Last fall, we reformed as the Barnard Prison Abolition Collective with the renewed purpose framed around prison abolition rather than prison reform. At its core, we're a student organization whose aim is to educate, organize, and serve around dismantling the carceral state and transforming how we think about justice. Though the organization is situated at Barnard, the group is connected within the broader university and the New York City community. Through campus activism, community education, and direct service, our work is centered on uplifting and contributing to the efforts of other abolitionist organizations and initiatives both on and off campus. So one of the initiatives that we developed last semester and into the summer were action hours, where students could commit to an hour of action-based advocacy. And so in the wake of George Floyd's murder, we sought to create a space of solidarity and accountability among our members where we could email and call officials to demand justice for those harmed by police violence, to advocate for compassionate release during the COVID crisis, and to advocate for abolitionist solutions to structural crises. Our next action hour is coming up in October with an organization called the Student Justice League. It's a project that was founded at Columbia that brings formerly incarcerated people and college students together to advocate on behalf of people in federal prison. The advocacy hour will focus on how to file administrative remedies and how to improve conditions of confinement. So among other events we have planned for the semester is a letter writing workshop with the Black and Pink, as well as an educational workshops that aim to address some of the unanswered questions and challenges that our peers are working through with regards to abolitionist theory. We're also excited to build partnerships with like-minded racial justice and abolitionist groups on campus, particularly those that are working towards anti-carceral activism. So BPAC's goal is to build a community on campus of students of abolition. We're continually learning from and engaging with abolitionist activists on and off campus. And so, we're really excited to be here tonight to, hopefully collaborate with some of the other activist groups that are also speaking on the panel tonight. And yeah, we're just really honored to be here, and thank you again for having us.
Great work. And so we're going to have to spread the news about those action hours, because that's really something that I know that there's so many students here who would like to participate in that. There's a dearth, there's a real desire, and oftentimes it's not clear what you can do, and so here you've got some action hours for us. That's really terrific. Tell us about them ahead. We'll share that. We'll get it through all of the different groups that we've got today, through Abolition 1313, through the Abolition Practicum, and we'll spread the news. Thanks so much for all the work you're doing. It's great to have you with us, and we're excited to work together going forward. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
And the other group I wanted to introduce, and now there are more groups on campus. There's a student group against the death penalty. There are a lot of other groups, and I wasn't able to bring them all together, but hopefully we will over the course of the semester. Another group I want to talk about is the Abolition Collective, and I'm hoping that Heaven Hale, a senior here at Columbia, and hi Heaven, how are you doing? Turn on your mic, and Ava Tesfaye, who just graduated, I believe. Yes, hi Ava, congratulations, class of 2020, I take it.
Yeah.
And so you both are going to introduce the Abolition Collective, again a non-hierarchical group. But you are going to just introduce it for the whole group, which I understand is already got 250 people or more. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your organization? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for having us. It was great to hear from everyone else, all the panelists. So basically, our group is a non-hierarchical collective with around 250 members. We started in April. We were seeing that there was a lot of conversations happening about abolition on social media, but we thought it would be more beneficial to have face-to-face conversations like over Zoom. So I'll share my screen.
Oh, great.
So with the, so we developed a website to,
super, thanks. That works well.
Okay, so we developed a website to educate people about abolition and also to interrogate some of its tenets. Here are some of our inspirations, who we model our politics after. And we have committees where we meet in smaller groups. We have a book club which was founded by Carla, and she's been hosting amazing book clubs. We read Our Prison's Obsolete for a month, and we were just dissecting that book and having really fruitful conversations. We have a creative works committee so I interned and volunteered with the arts program for Justice with the Justice Education Center. And it was great to go into those facilities and work with the incarcerated individuals. And there's actually this exhibition called Stories in Paper that I got to take part in at OBCC, and here are some of the works that were produced there.
Evan, I think we can see the PowerPoint and not the website if you're trying to show us the website.
Can you see it in that? Hold on.
We can't, I don't think we can see the website. If you could probably close the PowerPoint maybe, or stop the slideshow feature of it, and then.
Is it showing up now?
So now we're seeing the full PowerPoint in kind of, are you trying to show slide number 5?
Can you see it now?
Ah, there we go.
Yeah, so this is the website. This is the stories in paper. The exhibition that was presented. These pictures are from the Columbia Spectator, but it was really great to take part in these workshops. And
where was this artwork made?
OBCC, where we volunteered with the Justice and Education, the Rikers Arts Program at Rikers. And then here are our goals. We made this as a group, so yeah, it was just great to hear other people's perspectives and like meet everyone who was from all over social media, all over the nation. And yeah, so I'll let Eva talk about the podcast that she's been working hard on.
Great. Yes, Eva, tell us about that.
Yeah, so one of our main projects that we're working on right now is the podcast. It's called The Art of Abolition. It's mainly about spreading awareness on prison abolition and mass incarceration, but doing that through sharing music, art, and stories and experiences from people who are directly impacted. So like people who are incarcerated or were incarcerated, or their friends and family. We also talk to some other organizations like Black and Pink, ABO Comics, other organizations that work on prison abolition. So our main, you can see our goals here, but our main kind of thing is that we really don't want to be exploitative or extractive in our journalism. So we're really about letting people speak for themselves and share their own stories in art and experiences. We're working a little bit with Ivan on that and some other people who are actually here. And our other main thing is that we want to focus on issues that are most important to the community. So we're really making this podcast by and for this community, and not just like rich liberals who want to feel good about themselves. So our first few episodes, we're working on 3 right now. The first one is about letter writing. The second one is about COVID. And the third one is more about the protests, and it's going to be about looting and rioting. So our first episode should come out towards the end of October. So be on the lookout for it. It'll be available on our website and also on Apple and Spotify, and Columbia's radio station, WKCR 89.9 FM.
Terrific. Well, we will definitely be on the lookout, and then you'll send it around, and we'll send it around so we can all listen to the podcast. That's great work, and a great website, and already 250 people. That's really exciting.
People from all over the US.
That's great. Oh, that's amazing. That's great. Thank you for your work and for starting the organization. And so I hope that we're going to be able to work together. I know we will. Heaven, we're going to be working together a lot this semester too. But in the practicum, but also in all of these efforts. Thanks so much for coming on. I'm deeply grateful. All right, what an inspiration. What an inspiring group of organizations, of students, of activism and of abolition. Thank you all. I'm really thrilled. So now we have some time set aside to have a little bit of a discussion, to begin the critical discussion. We're going to be approaching questions of abolition all year, right? And next session, which is on October 15th, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, October 15th. We're actually going to be reading Du Bois and Angela Davis on abolition democracy. We'll have Bob Gooding-Williams, philosopher, and Karuna Mantena, political theorist, and we'll be really digging into the theory. Ivan Calaff will join us as well. But right now, I'd like to ask Alexis Hoag and Ivan. And hi, Alexis, how are you doing? Still standing?
Barely, but I'm on the couch.
Okay, good. And Bruce, how you doing? Turn on your mic. Thanks. You're still in the office, Bruce, looks like to me. It's been a long day, still going on. Ivan, you there still? Great. You're in the office too, I see. All right, so thank you so much. So a dream panel, as the other dream panels were, to talk a little bit, to start thinking critically about abolition democracy and the work that needs to be done, and how we think about it, and how we think about the institutions that already exist, the communities, the interaction between communities and institutions. And I think, let me do a quick introduction so that everybody knows you. I think everybody already does know you. Ivan, I had the good fortune of introducing you this morning, this afternoon, or this evening, whatever it was, but feels like we've been going. So maybe, I think the claim to fame right now, Ivan, is you're a band member in the Freedom Trap, okay? But a student at Columbia University School of Professional Studies and a Justice and Education Initiative scholar. So thanks so much, and a research assistant as well with the Social Relations Lab at Columbia University. Alexis Hoag is our inaugural practitioner in residence at the Eric H. Holder Jr. Initiative for Civil and Political Rights. Alexis came to us from the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, where she was litigating death penalty and other racial justice cases, policing, New York City policing. And before that, she was a death penalty attorney down in Tennessee for 10 years at the Federal Defender's Office it was in Nashville. She's been at it for a while, and she's extraordinary. She's also co-teaching the abolition practicum this year. She leads the Capital Post-Conviction Defense Practicum as well, and so we're thrilled to have you here with us. Bruce Western is a professor extraordinaire, chair of the sociology department here, the Bryce Professor of Sociology and Social Justice, and he's co-director of the Justice Lab at Columbia University. We've heard some from the Jindu, who is just joining the Justice Lab, but it's a large organization here at Columbia that does incredible work. And Bruce has been working on, Bruce has been working on these issues as far back as I can remember. Bruce published a book in 2006 called Punishment and Inequality in America, which you're probably all familiar with, because it was one of the most important and early books trying to trace and dig into the racial injustice of punishment in this country and the inequality of punishment, and also reveal to us things that we just didn't know at such an early time. Some of that work, I remember some of that work, Bruce, was all about showing how, like, when you included the prison population, how our numbers and our understanding of employment and unemployment changed completely, right? And a lot of the claims to growth and employment during the Clinton era, for instance, were dwarfed or turned negative when you included the prison population and the racial disparities. But in any event, he just has a book that just came out, Homeward, Life in the Year After Prison, which just came out in 2018. And he's doing a lot of work on solitary confinement in the Pennsylvania state prisons. And he's organized also the Square One project that I hope you all are gonna pay attention to, because the Square One project is really about changing the narrative in this country about criminal justice. We call it criminal justice, but you know what I mean, about the criminal legal system. Okay, all right, so let's get to it though. And what I want to, you've participated, you've seen the amazing work that's being done here. I want to think about how should we think about abolition in this moment in particular? Maybe Alexis, you could start us off, right? How do we think about abolition in this particular moment? Again, in the shadow of yesterday, and the horrifying shooting of Rihanna Taylor, but also the result that we saw yesterday. How should we be thinking about abolition today? Right. That's our task in the while that we have together. What do you think?
Barnard, I want to start by thanking you for giving us all this platform tonight and this space. It's rare to get this combination of speakers and participants and panelists to speak on any issue, let alone abolition. And so just thank you for creating
thank you.
these conversations. This is a really unique and urgent conversation to be having, and from all of the directions that are coming up this evening. And so, how it is that I think about abolition now, yes, I want to be considering the events of last night, but also the events of today, where the federal government, in our name, executed the 7th person in Terre Haute, Indiana, on federal death row. And this was Chris Vialov, and he was 19, just turned 19 at the time of the crime for which he was convicted. And this is their federal government carrying out these executions in the name and in the spirit of all of the citizens of this country. And that's really how I personally came to abolition, was through my work representing men. They were all men who had been sentenced to death by the state of Tennessee, and trying to show the decision maker, so in this instance it was a judge, it was no longer a jury, that my client was a human being and they were worth more than the worst they had ever done. And it's really in my transition to the Legal Defense Fund, doing the work that you mentioned with against the NYPD, and then of course coming to Columbia, where my students are leading me in the path to abolition. They are coming to Columbia, to the college, to the law school, as self-identified abolitionists. And so they are pushing me forward. And so I am trying to keep up. I am a student as much as I am a teacher with you on Wednesday evenings with our brilliant students. And I think so much about the term abolition and the history and the social context of abolitionist thinking, the framework, the ethic, as Allegra McLeod gives us. And I think about pre-Reconstruction and the abolitionist movement to end slavery. And the government was so well situated during those years after slavery was abolished, with the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendments, so really the second founding, what Eric Foner tells us, to create a new nation and to equip the newly recognized Black citizens that had been denied citizenship and rights and the equal protection of the laws until that point. And that the government, society failed them. And you had this retraction of rights beginning in 1877, and we have never fully reckoned with that unfulfilled promise still in 2020. And I think about the failure of the Attorney General in Kentucky to bring charges. And I think about how the criminal legal system was never equipped to bring redress to Black victims of state violence.
Right.
And that failure happened in 1877 with the retraction of the promise of Reconstruction. And so abolition to me is this powerful framework that can exist outside of the criminal legal system, which when we do get victories, it's rare, it's not the norm. And abolitionism, an abolitionist framework, gives us the space to demand and seek restorative justice, preventative justice. So I think abolitionism is vital. Because we cannot sustain, we cannot continue as a nation. The spring and the summer's mass demonstrations have shown us that. But I'm curious to hear what my colleagues.
Yeah, no. But I think that's a particularly useful lens and way to think about it, right? Which is kind of outside the system. It's formulating something outside the system somehow. It's looking beyond for, and in that process, of course, one has to prefigure. One has to prefigure things that we haven't done before, that we haven't seen before, that we haven't seen work before, in part. But we have to prefigure them and try and not only imagine them, but start to put them in place in particular places. One of the you know, we had we had put up one article for today's conversation, which was Allegra McLeod's article on, and I don't have the exact title of that right in front of me right now, because my screens are freezing up. It's envisaging abolition democracy, right? Yeah, and one of the things that she does in that piece, I think, which ties exactly to what you're suggesting, is look at ways in which people have begun to try to find alternative mechanisms, alternative ways, right, to deal with issues of conflict that are inevitable in society, but that need to be addressed in these alternative ways. It's a brilliant piece because it gives these kind of examples of efforts to do that, whether it was within the Black Youth Project, where they found Black Youth 100 Project, where they addressed issues of sexual assault and sexual violence in an alternative way, or the other examples that she gives. But it is that, so it's the inside and the outsider. It's reaching outside, which I'm going to want to get to with Bruce, because of these issues of community and institutions. Before I get to Bruce, Ivan, what does this resonate? What are your, and you wrote a beautiful piece for us, a beautiful post that kind of addresses these issues as well, which we just put up today.
So I never, till today, I've never considered myself an abolitionist, right? I've sort of been struggling with it for several reasons. One of the reasons being that I grew up in institutions my whole life since I was 8 years old, whether it's foster home, juvie halls, Rikers Island, state prisons, and you know, a lot of the friends that I have and people that I know have gone through these systems, and it's sort of difficult to, for me anyway, it's sort of difficult to just imagine right now growing up in a world without prisons, right? Because prisons wasn't, for me and for many of the folks that I know, prison wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when. It was a certainty. And it was the one certainty that we can bet on, you know, one thing that we can bet on was gonna be there, and we were gonna go, we were gonna travel that road at some point in our lives. And it's one of the few institutions, unfortunately, that the Black and brown communities have a tie to. You know, we don't trust the medical for obvious reasons. We don't trust hospitals, schools. We don't trust the courts for obvious reasons. And one of the institutions that, for some reason, not for some reason, but we have a direct tie to is the prison. And for me, it's very difficult to imagine a world without it, because even for some of the folks I speak to, right, they talk about some of their family members, some of their friends, and they say, well, I'm glad he's locked up. You know, he was using drugs, and maybe he can get his life together while he's in there. Maybe he can take some college courses, or, you know, he can take some drug program. He can, as if prison was a healing place, right? It was a place where people go to heal. And that's sort of the narrative that runs around in Black and brown communities, for the most part, that somehow people go to these places to get better, or they need to go there for a timeout to sort of refresh. And it's crazy.
That's really rich. I mean, we got to pause there for a minute. I mean,
yeah, I'm sorry.
That's really rich. No, I mean, it's like how do we come to believe we are abolitionists, right? And I mean, I thought it's unimaginable in a way, right? Abolition, it's unimaginable, and particularly for you, Ivan, who spent your life growing up in the system, right? It's just kind of like it's unimaginable. It's unimaginable. And you know, it's a funny thing because you know I went down to Alabama in 1989 to represent people on death row, and I didn't consider myself an abolitionist. I don't know about you, Alexis, when you started this work. I mean, I went down because it was like because of the racial injustice. Because I mean, you know, Angela Davis was so far ahead of us and has created such a path for us to follow and others. But I too didn't think of myself as an abolitionist doing work, representing, trying to get rid of the death penalty, right?
My focus was on my individual client,
right,
and to stop the state from killing them. It wasn't on, you know, a systemic challenge.
Right, yeah.
And sort of part of the challenge for me also is that we have to sort of be careful what we wish for, right? So yeah, we have to get rid of prisons. I agree 1,000%. But then we've created such a dependency on prisons, and we've created this massive economy around prisons. For instance, here in New York State, and I'm sure it's similar in other states and nationally, maybe even globally. But for instance, in Dannemora, New York, it's a small town, upstate New York, and Clinton Correctional Facility sits right in the middle of this town. If that prison was to close down, that town would die. It would die. And yes, we want folks to get out, even if we were equipped to provide everyone in that prison with resources, housing, medical, whatever, therapy. If we were equipped to provide everyone coming out of those prisons those resources, are we ready to provide everyone in that town resources as well? Because if we take that prison out of that town, it dies. It dies.
Right. A whole economy built on this, right? A whole economy built on this. Now, Bruce, you've been doing a lot of work on those issues of the whole economy and the relationship between the community and different communities and these institutions. So how does this resonate for you? And where are you in relation to abolition, but also these issues of kind of transformation, right? Which of course is what you're all about.
Yeah, that's the question of the day. And I just want to start by echoing Alexis as well, Barnard. You've put together quite an amazing program, and I really feel honoured to be in this company today. It was great to see Cheryl and Jindu and the Freedom Trap musicians were fantastic, and the students. So changes is the question today, and I definitely hear Ivan, right? At abolition, there's a language issue I would like to process with the group, and abolition's a very charged word, and I think in some of the policy conversations I'm in, it gets dismissed, right? It's too extreme. It's not taken seriously. If we tear down prisons, chaos will erupt. And I love the Angela Davis quote that you posted, and so she writes, slavery could not be truly abolished until people were provided with the economic means for their subsistence. They also need access to educational institutions and need to claim voting and other political rights. And so abolition for her, I read that as saying, is very much a positive project, right? It's about the creation of some positive alternative to tremendously punitive set of institutions that perpetrate state violence. And so I think the question of abolition for me is sort of, what are our criteria for real change, authentic change that disrupts the logic of the system? How do we distinguish things that seem incremental or superficial, maybe things like electronic monitoring or risk assessment, from something much more fundamental, like eliminating youth incarceration, for example, which is the project that Jindu is working on. And I think the answer I had, and I'm like, my thinking about this is completely fluid at the moment. But 6 months ago, I would have said, real change has to address poverty, racial injustice, and violence. And so whatever reform that we're envisioning, unless it addresses the really deep and enduring problem of poverty in American society, that's not transformational change. That's not part of, I guess, the abolition project. Unless it addresses the history of racial injustice, then that's not real change. It's not part of the abolition project. And one of the hardest things politically of all is, unless it addresses the problem of violence, which is both the state violence of incarceration and certainly capital punishment, but also interpersonal violence. It's not real change. And so, like, you know, as I listened to the conversation today, this is sort of, I'm sharing my evolution here. I think, you know, they're really big, difficult issues: poverty, racial injustice, and violence. But there's something even deeper below that, and I think it's fundamentally about power and democracy, and who has power and who has voice. You know, who has voice in our political process. And all of those things, poverty, racial injustice, and violence, are all tremendously disempowering. And addressing those things is a project of empowerment. And I think this, in part, is, and Alexis said as well, this is partly a project of humanization. And so, unless whatever we're doing is humanizing people, it celebrates their humanity. And what does that mean? To me, it means celebrating people in their creativity, in their loving relationships. That's something that we all share, and we can see something of ourselves in others when we acknowledge and celebrate their creativity and their capacity for loving relationships. And so, I don't know, that's really download, but
yeah, no, that's really helpful. That's really helpful. That's really helpful in part because, so I think, you know, Alexis was pushing us to think about the questions of inside and outside, and Ivan also. And in a way, Bruce, you were kind of pushing us to think about depth somehow. Depth of the change that is needed. In other words, and what I heard you saying in a way is that, you know, we've all inevitably been involved in kind of criminal justice reform, but through the work that we do, because of the work you do, because it's the work Alexis does, because of Ivan, me too, but the difference somehow between reform and abolition has to do with the depth, it seems to me, and that's what I heard in your intervention, Bruce. It's about the depth of the change that needs to be done, such that, you know, tinkering is not necessarily going to do anything about all of the legacy of the history of the way in which the criminal justice system functions as a way to maintain racial hierarchy. I mean, it makes me think of, it makes me think of yesterday, Alexis put together an amazing set of readings. And we had Khalil Muhammad on Black criminality. And we were also reading a piece by Brian Stevenson on policing the Black body, and a piece by Paul Butler, Chokehold. And I mean, what was so clear from Khalil's book, right, is this issue of Black dangerousness and Black criminality that Alexis Hoag is working on right now and writing about, and the history of it, and the long history of it, and the way in which it perpetuates those racial hierarchies that were intended to be formed by the turn to the criminal law as a way to replace slavery, right? Now, you can't imagine anything reform-oriented that doesn't, if you can't transform that, and if you can't transform the association we have with Black criminality, you're just kind of, you're just working at the edges. You're just putting, actually, Ivan, you put it best when we were talking the other day, right? You're just putting lipstick on it, right? That's all you're doing.
Reform to me sounds like, every time I hear someone say reform, like, this is no disrespect to anyone, sort of like saying, let's buy the KKK some really nice suits. Instead of these white sheets that they wear all the time, let's get them some really colorful things that people, really pretty, with pretty smiley faces on it. And reform is just, to me, it's just another word that means robbing communities of resources that they really need and putting them into things that we don't need. Police reform. We don't need to allocate any more funds to reform the police. We need those funds to create better schools, better conditions in the Black and brown communities. The police they don't need to get better. Our communities need to get better.
Right. And even deeper than that, right? In other words, like the change has to be, I mean, we kind of like need to unravel this fabric of society in a way, unravel the fabric of society, get us back to 1877, right? And then start spinning again, right? But you got to get back to 1877. You got to somehow you have to unravel all of these so deeply entrenched, interwoven kind of notions of and mindsets of Black criminality, for instance, or that are reflected, of course, in all of the statistics that we can marshal, but that the statistics don't get at, and correcting those statistics don't get at, because there's something much deeper. So yeah, it's this idea of deeper transformation that I was hearing in your thoughts, Bruce. But Alexis, you want to jump back in, so go for it. Yeah.
Well, I had lots of reporters contact me, over the summer in the wake of George Floyd's murder, and ask if I thought that police reform that would limit or ban certain police tactics would solve the problem. And, like Ivan, it's just, putting lipstick on this, dressing it up. And the root problem is really this presumption of dangerousness and criminality that law enforcement, that society assigns to Black people, to brown people, people of color. And the fact that our laws allow police officers to use lethal force when they reasonably believe they are in danger means that when they see a Black or a brown person, and there is that presumption of criminality and dangerous, they can deploy lethal force. And we see how this plays out.
Right.
And then last night, we see how our legal system then responds to it. So the prosecutors, the outside prosecutors, the state attorney general looks at these standards, these neutral, which we teach our law students are neutral standards.
Right. The notion of neutrality, right? The notion of neutrality, which in part, I think the notion of neutrality, we have to think about the concept of neutrality tied in part to reform issues. I think that the reform approach often buys into a notion of neutrality of numbers, which precisely when you start to dig at those numbers, right, you know that they're not neutral. They are the product. I mean, and in part, you know, so that's what we were reading yesterday. We have to bring that book into this conversation. Condemnation of Blacklist. Yeah, we have to bring that book. But I mean, it goes to, for instance, kind of like the use of algorithms as a way to deal with bail reform, or as a way to deal with parole reform or whatnot. And again, it's kind of
predictability of criminal conduct, which is terrifying to me.
Right. Well, I mean, but the problem with it is this notion that we have an objective measure, which is the same problem with the objectivity of the crime statistics from the 1920s that Khalil Muhammad was talking about, but that we have a certain objectivity when in fact those tools are not predicting criminal activity, they're predicting what the police did and what the police are going to do. In other words, I mean, they're only those prediction tools are thought of as objective, and it's that notion of objectivity that we really have to get at, and that's what I think is the depth part.
And Barnard, there's a scientific term for this: garbage in, garbage out.
Right. Yeah. But yeah. But we need to analyze it in order to understand exactly what it is that those particular numbers in the algorithm are reflecting, because what they are reflecting, of course, is the public nature of particular crimes that are policed, street crime, and the way the police are policing. But it's very difficult. Yeah, go ahead, Bruce. It's very difficult to go deep when you're kind of cut off with the objectivity of particular tools. Yeah, go ahead, Bruce.
Yeah. I think there's a very good conversation. I think another side of the coin to what Alexis is saying is that, you know, this presumption of Black criminality is just you know, so deeply woven into American society and history. Not only helps us understand police abuses and brutality and so on, it helps us understand why the police are not accountable, right? There's kind of a political dimension to this story, because there's a segment of the population that isn't entitled to full voice and full representation. And I think this is the problem to solve, right? If so many dysfunctions of the system, use of force, lack of accountability, and community disempowerment and disinvestment, all trace their way back to this sort of institutionalized project of dehumanization. And I like this idea of depth, because partly I think it's about establishing, we can't say restoring because it's never existed, partly about establishing a depth of human relationships, right, where you know, people are fearful, people you know, white America looks at Black America in a dehumanizing way. The quality of that relationship is debased, and the political project, I think, is to create meaningful human relationships in which people are able to relate to each other and see something of themselves, which is the antithesis of dehumanization.
Right. It's the antithesis of deunionization. It's the antithesis of kind of the othering that goes with something like Black criminality, right? You know, I mean, and it's so that depth not only in human relations, but I think in history. It's almost as if there are multiple forms of depth here, and one of them is the soil, basically the soil that has kind of formed and sedimented on top of the possibility of human relations, the form that has sedimented since, 1877 and the end of Reconstruction, such that it kind of like sediments and sediments and sediments, and we end up here. And you can't just clean up the top. You gotta go down into it to kind of get out of those levels. It makes me think a little bit of the work that EJI has been doing with lynchings and trying to dig out the soil from the locations where men and women were lynched. A remarkable project, but people who participate go out to a scene, the site of a lynching, and they dig out the soil that's there, and they put it in a jar and they bring it back to EJI. EJI has an incredible gallery of all the different soils named after the persons who were lynched. But it's something about that soil that gets sedimented on top of these kind of atrocities. And so the change, the transformation has to be deep, right? It just has to go through that. It has to kind of penetrate all the different layers and get back to justice. I was hoping that we would have 45 minutes for questions, but it was such an extraordinary. But we do have a few minutes for questions, and I know I think Cogni has one question. So this, just a word about this experience you're in right now. There are multiple different forms of experiencing this seminar. One of them is that we do have students who are here masked and social distancing at the law school. We're doing this live. We also have a bunch of people who are attendees in the Zoom who can pose questions. We had one question from someone asking about Brazil. Sorry, it was a question about the international ramifications of abolition, which I hope that we're going to get to. And then we have people watching it streamed on YouTube who can ask questions through Twitter. So we've got a bunch of different, but we got one question right here, and it's live, and Cogni, a student in the class. So why don't we go ahead and turn on your mic and see if you can go ahead. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you for being here and speaking with us. I feel like I've learned a lot in the past few hours. I think just building on Ivan's initial comment, I'm thinking a lot about the messiness of abolition, especially since there's a depth involved that involves cultivating an abolition ethic that means creating active communities who are willing to problem solve on their own and take ownership of their community and their neighbors. And I think with the prison system, it's so easy to make the problem disappear. And we know that it doesn't disappear and it turns into a system. But I guess my question is, how can we account for an abolition that can make mistakes and that can make public mistakes that are visible to communities? And I think as a link to that, perhaps, is what is the place of law in abolition, especially if we see law as something that is historically upheld systems of incarceration.
Great question. Great question. Who wants to start in there? Some thoughts.
I think she called out Ivan.
Yeah, I think so. I did hear that at the beginning.
Wow. So that's that's my thing as well. I think that instead of focusing so much on getting rid of stuff and decreasing stuff, we should sort of focus and concentrate on building and creating healthier, more vibrant communities, right? Instead of Black and brown communities looking to the outside and to other folks to give us handouts to help us out, we should be able to help ourselves. We should be able to create the communities that want, the lives that we want. It's not going to be easy. So it's, of course, it's not going to be easy, but is the investment going to be worth it? Absolutely. That doesn't mean that those two things can't, that they're mutually exclusive, that they can't coexist. I mean, we can still abolish prisons and whatever else we have and still create what we need to create. But the focus shouldn't be solely on abolishing and then creating a void where now people are left in the lurch. Sort of like, what do we do now? So we can do those things in tandem, and I think we should. Absolutely. I mean, it's not just. And do we need help? Do we welcome help? Absolutely. Do we want somebody to hold our hand? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. No. So
that's great. That's really good, Ivan. I want to ask Jindu to jump in too. So you can turn on your camera, Jindu, because I know I know this is something you're thinking about. Alexis, did you want to jump in before Jindu? Go ahead.
I felt, since I put Ivan on the spot, I had to put myself back on. And I hear the second part of the question was about what can the law do? Because we recognize that the law has, held up white supremacy. But something that I tell my students and something that I have to believe in is that the law, yes, it can perpetuate inequality, but it can also dismantle inequality. And Cheryl Eiffel, President, Director, Counsel of the Legal Defense Fund of the NAACP, has been speaking vocally and repeatedly about the fact that the federal government actually has tools at their disposal, the Justice Department, to investigate, obtain court orders to monitor police departments. And there's a Law Enforcement Misconduct Act that allows the federal government, the Department of Justice, to look into the patterns and practices of local police departments. And under Obama administration, I believe there are about 25 investigations going with various police departments across the country. And under the Trump administration, there's been one. And so this is not the fix all, solve all of police violence, but it is an existing tool that is being severely underutilized by a current administration. And so the law is there, but who is in charge of using it? And right now we have, we know what we have in charge, who has spoken that he won't allow for a peaceful transfer of power, and it's terrifying. Mm-hmm. But the law is a tool that can both perpetuate but also dismantle. And I have to put my faith somewhat in the law, not completely, but somewhat.
Yeah, we're gonna have to have a long conversation about that. We're gonna have to have a long conversation about that because faith in the law. I don't know. I fought the law and the law won. All right, Jindu, go ahead.
No, definitely. Thank you for saying that. I have like 2% faith in the law. And it's a shaky too. But I really wanted to respond.
That's what happens with my students. I feel bad about that. I'm sorry.
From day one, you're just like, this is garbage. And we're like, yeah. But I wanted to respond to the students' framing of abolition as messy. And I think that what kind of struck me about that, and I so appreciated the question because it forced me kind of to think, to me, there's nothing messier about a system that, is intentional about incarcerating 2.3 million people annually. There's nothing kind of messier than the sexual assault that happens in carceral settings, then the snuffing out of life that happens in carceral settings, and the social and political death that happens in carceral settings. And, in thinking about that question, I've kind of been heartened recently by the brilliant Black lawyer and abolitionist Erica Purnell, who talked about on a webinar, I believe with Charlene Carruthers, about how when the formal system of enslavement needed to come down, the formerly enslaved folks didn't think about, hey, how can we build this new beautiful system or series of systems that we can kind of replace this brutal, punishing, system with. They just started running. They just started moving towards something. And how, Derica calls on us to just move. There's nothing that can be, God willing, worse than what it is we have now. And what kind of that on the go planning kind of calls for and kind of recognizes is the urgency of the harm that's happening behind prison walls. As you so aptly put it, that's kind of disappeared behind prison walls. And so when I think about that, I think about, the ways in which communities are already doing that work to organize themselves and provide accountability for themselves. I think about, Common Justice with Danielle Sered, and she does a lot of work pulling cases that deal with violent crime out of the criminal legal system. I think about Mimi Kim, who does a lot of alternatives to policing and alternatives to imprisonment work around sexual assault and interpersonal assault. So there are all of these. I think about transformharm.com or .org, which is run by Miriam Kaba, who's just brilliant. And I think about a story that she shared about one of her first instances of, alternatives to policing. And it was someone in her community who was being harmed by their partner. And she rolled up with a handful of people. And she said, well, if you lay hand on this person, we will body you. And I think about how messy that is, but it was effective. There was no harm that happened in that household moving forward. So I think about the creativity of small local solutions and how we're going to need thousands of answers to the current moment and the current mess that incarceration has put us in. So, those are some of the thoughts that I had.
Great.
I just thought the question was important because it sort of reminds us to really be sure before we commit to a course of action that the cure is not worse than the disease. That's all. Just to be sure. And I agree with everything you just said. Absolutely.
All right, great. So we're over time right now, unfortunately, and it's been such a rich conversation. And there are more questions that are coming in the question and answer. Hi, Alan Feldman has a question, and Sonia Anwar has a question. There's an anonymous attendee who has a question, so that would be someone who's in the attendee group, and it says, do you think an abolitionist framework that is not also anti-capitalist can achieve its stated goals, or does it become defanged as another word for liberal capitalist reform? And again, I think that's a key question, and in part it's a key motivating this seminar, because we are going to be talking about the abolition of property. We are going to be talking about the abolition of capital, actually, because I don't think you can think about transforming the world, going back to 1877, undoing it, unwinding it, and remaking and refabricating a world without putting at the center economic relations and questions of returns and the framework that was what created, what pushed towards convict leasing, right? It's like if you don't change the framework, the economic framework, you're not going to get a different system. You're just going to have something that's called different, that's called differently. So great questions, Alan. we're not going to be able to get to yours right now, but we are going to keep it on our program, and we are going to get to it. We're going to get to all these questions, and we're going to get to not only abolition in the context of slavery, criminal justice, policing, prisons, and capital punishment, but abolition in the context of property, in the context of capital, in the context of oil, in the context of borders, right? In the context of gender relations. So stay tuned. So first of all, the next seminar, 213, will be on the theoretical construction of abolition democracy. So we're really going to be digging into that framework, looking at Du Bois, looking at Angela Davis, to try and understand the theoretical underpinnings of how we should think about these things. And we're going to be joined by Bob Gooding-Williams, Kuna Mentena, Ivan Calaff, and we're going to be reading those texts. And so join us on October 15th. A big shout out and a big thank you to Fonda Shen, who's behind the scenes and made this all possible. Fonda, can you come on, please? There you go. I don't know how you managed, but that was an amazing feat. Thank you so much. I do want to end, though. Where I began, which was with Angela Davis. the question, how do we act in the face of so much injustice, right? How do we act in the face of last night, and how do we act in the face of, George Floyd, and how do we act in the face of, and George Floyd was just 5-6 years after all of the injustice, Eric Garner, and the perpetuity of those injustices, and those were just more recent instantiations. How do we do it? How do we, Ivan, turn off your phone for a sec. How do we address this? How do we go on, right? How do we go on? And what did Angela Davis said? She had an answer. She said, as Dorothy Roberts reminds us, she says, you have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world, and you have to do it all the time, right? So I wanted to start and I wanted to end with her words. Now, but the way we're going to end tonight, other than thanking everyone, thank you so much, all of our panelists. Thank you so much. It's been extraordinary. Thank you, Bruce and Alexis, Ivan, and all of our earlier panelists, is that I think the only proper way to end tonight is with another song, okay? And so, Fonda, will you put on a song? And this is what we're gonna hear now is Holding Out Hope. And it's a song at Carnegie Hall. And let me,
Guess I'm waiting for a miracle. Yes, I'm praying that I hear from a God who I have to believe made us to be better than we've been behaving lately. I'm just reaching for a blessing, requesting a little help and answers to questions that maybe we should be asking ourselves, like, can't we agree there's something wrong if I feel the need to scream my life matters? And why in the world to you does that feel like an accusation? How many guns does one man need? How many children have to bleed and die before we concede? This math, it ain't adding up right, but I'm holding out hope that this is all some passing temporary insanity. I'm holding out hope that deep inside we'll recognize our common humanity. I'm holding out hope the way things are is not the way that they have to be. No, I'm holding on to love, holding off despair, and I'm holding out hope. I'm holding on to love, holding off despair, and I'm holding out hope. I looked for answers on my TV. I saw a man who says he works for me. Then he offered a new brand of history. Told me not to believe what my own eyes see. I took to the streets to get the news. Got hit with about 1 million views, but 999,999 were so afraid that they couldn't even hear what the first one said. I found a quiet place where I could listen to a soft-spoken preacher teaching something different, that it's less about me and it's more about you. He wept for a heart that was broken into, and as his tears fell, they watered the roots of a tree that bore the most beautiful fruit, and he cried out begging the hungry to try it. But since it was free, nobody would buy it. This is all some passing temporary insanity. Deep inside we'll recognize our common humanity. The way things are is not the way that they have to be. No, I'm holding on to love, holding off despair, and I'm holding out hope. I'm holding on to love, holding off despair, and I'm holding out hope. So hold on when you feel you're getting tired. Hold on when you feel you're getting tired. Hold on. I know you can get tired. Lord knows how I get tired. But oh, you feel you're getting tired. You're lost, tossed, weary, and tired. All the time you're most tired. You got to hold on. I saw that preacher the other day. He saw me and just turned away. I asked him whether he'd be coming back. He said we killed every prophet we'd ever had. Well, I refuse to believe that all is lost and justice is dead as Jesus on his cross. So since love's resurrection is who we need, then this is the gospel I choose to believe. This is all some passing temporary insanity. Deep inside we'll recognize our common humanity. The way things are is not the way that they have to be. No, I'm holding on to love, holding off despair, and I'm holding out hope. I'm holding on to love, holding off despair, and I'm holding out hope. I'm holding on to love, holding off despair, and I'm holding out hope. Holding out hope. Holding out hope.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks, Alexis. Thanks, Bruce. Holding out hope, huh? Holding out hope. All right, I hope to see you on for Abolition 213. Thanks so much. Thanks, Bruce. Thanks, Alexis. Thanks, Ivan. Thanks, everyone. It's been, for me, really moving. And I'm so grateful to all of you. Thanks, Fonda, for starting it off this way this year. Thanks. All right, stay tuned. Bye-bye.